This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional, and also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you, and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing. And it's overall just a really good, feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then 3rd, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face-to-face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there.
Hey Nomads, this is Dylan coming at you talking about South America. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dylan Callier, and this episode is going to be about my preparation for my big South America trip. For those that are interested in going to South America, I'm going to tell you what I did in order to kind of prepare for this trip. If you're kind of watching this, a lot of what I'm going to be going through is also relatable to just general international trips. And so there's going to be a lot of content in here that will be really, really helpful for you as well. And for those that are just kind of jumping into the travel game, maybe you haven't done an international travel trip, you're not really sure if that's something you want to do, I guess the big takeaway for this would be you're about to jump into a traveling profession that gives you many different opportunities, many different doors to have the life that you want. And if you want to take an extended period of time off, you get to do so. You get a lot of flexibility, you get a lot of freedom with this type of lifestyle and being able to accept the challenges that come with this type of lifestyle. And so I want those individuals to reflect on the type of life they want to create for themselves, and also just give a call to action of leaving and going, experiencing other cultures, experiencing a country where they don't speak your language, going out and helping those cultures, being involved in mission trips, those things. So a lot of information in here for those that are interested in making the jump. I originally had my big boy travel trip, my first real big trip to Asia. Got to learn a lot from prepping from that. So some of this is going to be reflecting on that trip, and then learn from that trip, kind of did it differently this time around. And then also what I learned that I wish I would have done prepping. So I'll split this up into 2 categories: the things that I did that worked out well, and then the things that I wish I would have done when preparing for a trip to South America. So first, to jump in, I think one of the most important things is to get vaccinated before you go on this trip. I ended up going and just searching up like traveling nurse vaccinations on Google, and I ended up finding a company called Passport Health. And this is the company that I used before I went on my Asia trip. It's also the company that I used before going to South America. They have nurses and they have many different locations. If you're near a major city, they're definitely going to be there. In some smaller cities, they're there as well. With these Passport Health locations, you go in, they pretty much have everything that you would need to know about going to a different location. So it saves you a lot of the hassle of like reviewing, potentially like needing to know what kind of vaccinations you need before going to that country. So they kind of do all that. You just show up. It's pretty cheap. I think, between like 45 to 85 bucks just for the consultation, depending on your location. And they tell you all the vaccinations that you need. Going into these appointments, you'll need to know what vaccinations you've already had. Us being travel healthcare workers, we probably have a file somewhere that has all that information on it anyhow, so that's super helpful. And you just walk in with your list and they look at where you're going and they compare it to what you have, and then they give you the recommended vaccinations. Some are recommended. Some vaccinations you absolutely 100% need. Like if you arrive to the border and they ask for this vaccination information, you don't have it, they won't let you in, sort of thing. And for the countries that I went to in South America, they never asked for this documentation, but this documentation is super important because it's actually something that I was warned about to watch out for, because people will like pickpocket you. They'll take your little yellow booklet card that has all your vaccinations on it because it's so valuable. Some of these vaccinations are pretty high dollar, and some persons out there that are wanting to travel to countries, after you get to whatever country it might be, if you're staying in a hostel, somebody sees this and they don't have that vaccination, they just save themselves a bunch of money and not having to get that vaccine in order to go to their next location, or vice versa. So that was something that I was warned about. Specifically for South America, there's 2 vaccinations I believe that you had to get: yellow fever and typhoid. I already had typhoid for Asia, and yellow fever, it was a one-time vaccination. Some of the vaccinations you'll want to view ahead of time, or just get this consultation maybe like 3 months in advance if you know your travel date or you're pretty set on these travels, for sure, because some of them are series that you'll have to get. Luckily, us being travel healthcare, we probably already have hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and some of the other necessary ones. But for example, I believe rabies, if I were to have gotten that before my Asia trip, then it would have been a series. And that was one of the reasons that I didn't get it, which led to the whole story of me getting bit by a dog and having to be treated for rabies. And with that, the reason I didn't get rabies vaccination before then was, one, I thought I would be super safe and just not play with the monkeys. Not recognizing dogs would, be an issue as well. So I thought like, I'll just be smart. I can avoid that. It's fine. And 2, it was actually a series of 3. So when I went and finally got the consultation, there wasn't enough time for me to get that vaccination. So when you walk in there with Passport Health, there is a little bit of, I don't want to call it a salesy atmosphere, but they do push products, or they have their own products there for you to buy. The first time I went for Asia, I ended up just kind of buying what they suggested. I quickly learned out that some of the things were pretty cheap. Like I couldn't find it cheaper anywhere else. And then other items I could have picked up at REI or Amazon for cheaper. And so specifically like the Mosquito Repellent, with the high percentage of DEET, there's like a spray that you can buy at REI that I absolutely love. Like spray your clothes down, and it's good for like 4 washes to kind of deter mosquitoes. You can also buy clothes with DEET in them, but if you look at the fine print, it only lasts for about 3 or 4 washes anyhow. So don't spend extra money for DEET clothes. Like you can just buy the spray. It's pretty cheap, and just spray all your clothes down if you're going to an area like South America that you really do have to worry about all the mosquitoes. So that was the vaccination for this time around. And then what was also nice is that going back to Passport Health, I didn't have that yellow booklet anymore. Moving 3 times at least, at minimum, per year, I've lost it somewhere along the way. And so they just put what I had already had. They had their own like records. Like you get this little yellow booklet, they give it a stamp, and they sign it. And so some of these vaccinations only last about 2 years. Some vaccinations last 10 years, whatever it might be. And they were able to give me all of that information there. So I really like them. I'll definitely be using them again in the future. So I highly recommend Passport Health. I'll include that in the show notes for those that are wanting a quick link. But yeah, if you're getting ready for a trip, just search Passport Health near you, or there might be other companies as well. Just travel vaccines, something like that. And they do give educational pamphlets out as well. There are, like I said, there's mandatory vaccines and vaccines that you maybe don't absolutely 100% need. And then you can kind of decide for yourself if that's something, depending on the areas you're going to go, if you're going to be at a high risk for encountering that disease. Number 2, super important, was getting health insurance. I used World Nomads for Asia. That is the company. I can't stop ranting and raving about this company because it worked out so well. One, I used World Nomads for Asia, and when I was signing up, I didn't click all the countries that I was going to be going to. So I had Thailand clicked, I didn't have Indonesia clicked. Indonesia ended up being where I was bit by the dog, and so I was so worried that I wasn't going to be covered for a lot of this stuff because I didn't click like the country I was going to go to. But their policy is actually anything outside of like a 100-mile radius of your home. And so not only did they cover everything in Indonesia, even though I didn't click the country, when I came back to San Diego and needed my last round of rabies vaccination, they also covered that because I was 100 miles away from my home in the central U.S. And that, when I got back to the U.S., I think that specific shot was like $800, something like that. Like, it was massive. The amount of money that all that rabies stuff cost me, I think it was for sure at least $6,000. I think it was $6,500. And for $100, $200 for this travel insurance, they covered it all. And I did get World Nomads again for the South America trip. I ended up not needing them this round. I know potentially if I would have had some airlines like canceled, I could have gone to the company. I don't know if they would have accepted it with like a pandemic. There's some pushback. I know there's a big long threads in some of these travel groups that I belong to specifically for South America, and many different companies were basically like denying claims because their policies didn't cover pandemics or, you know, anything like whatever they're using to try and like get out of it. So I don't know if it would have helped if I would have, say, booked a flight and then it got canceled sort of thing. But I ended up not needing them this time around, and it just gives you a really, really nice blanket to feel safe if something were to happen. You're pretty much covered medically there, and then once you're transported back to the U.S., your own health insurance will start to cover you back home. So highly recommend World Nomads. There are other options, but those were the ones that took care of me when I didn't think I would have any leg to stand on. So the third thing I did was kind of preparing for the trip. I don't have when I make plans for these trips, I don't have like, some people know exactly, oh, we're going to spend 5 days in this city, and then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and then have their Airbnbs booked. And I don't like to do that. I feel very constricted with that schedule, and so I tend to drive other people crazy with like not knowing where I'm going to stay until I show up to the city, or not knowing where I'm going to stay until the night before. Many times I'll be on bus in transit towards the city, and I'll like scroll through and find a decent place on Hostel World or Airbnb. For actually going there, you want to make sure, this was something I learned on the Asia trip, I didn't book a place to stay in Asia until maybe about 2 hours before I boarded the flight. If you don't have like an address for you to stay at, that can be problematic at the borders or at the border patrol. They will ask you where you're going to be staying, and you need to have an address on file. So that is very helpful. Also, what I ended up doing with looking at these like government sites when I was planning the trip is, one, safety. They, like, if you go to travel.gov, they have pretty much like all the country issues going on, and they rank them like level 1 through level 4. I think level 1 is the worst, and they'll tell you like no fly zones, like don't go to Venezuela right now. And then they'll tell you like the pretty bad areas, whether it be for crime or whether it be for tsunamis or environmental factors like that. It gives you a really good sense of what's going on and where they say you should go. They also tell you the passport needs for each place. For example, when I was preparing for South America, I was looking at all the different countries, and specifically Bolivia at the time when I was getting ready didn't accept general passports and general visas from the US. You had to get your own specific visa for Bolivia. Come January, after I'd kind of got a decent plan for my trip, I was going to start here, I was going to go here, a month here, sort of thing. Bolivia ended up changing their rules, and so all of a sudden now you can go into Bolivia with the general US visa. And so that is where I kept track of what was going on with all the different countries and all the different regulations and everything that I needed to do. They also have their vaccinations there, which if you want to double check and make sure that you're not going to get stopped at the border after your visit to Passport Health, you can do it there. And it was just a really, really good website. It's pretty well done. It's pretty clean. One of the very few government sites that actually looks pretty decent. And then also, even before all of this COVID stuff happened, they have something called the STEP program. It stands for Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. And you sign up and basically tell them a general idea of where you're going to be during your trip, just in case something were to happen. The government knows where you're at. Never in my life did I think I was going to be hit with a pandemic when I was over in a different country, in a different continent. And this was something that they pushed heavily for government once they started getting involved, for you to enroll. Jess and I were already enrolled in this before we got there, but I thought maybe, if I end up going missing, or if there's, I was thinking more like military threats for them to pull us out. Never in my wildest dreams did I think of a pandemic happening. But STEP program, especially now, I think before people would have maybe thought I was a little paranoid, giving the government all my information of where I was going to be, yada, yada, yada. But now I 100% very strongly support using the STEP program before you leave the U.S. To go to another country. The next thing that I did that I got super lucky on in Asia, because I didn't realize this was a thing, but when I travel, I typically just buy a one-way ticket and then I figure out when I'm getting home later. Because I usually don't know exactly where I'm going to end up, so I never really buy a returning ticket before I'm inside the country. Usually, I think when I was in Asia, I had it maybe figured it out maybe 2 weeks in advance, maybe 1 week in advance. So it's a little more pricey that way, but again, I'm not constricted to a schedule. So as long as you're willing to make that little pro and con, kind of weight, decide. As long as you're able to weigh out those pros and cons for that decision, I'm much more happy with not having a schedule and paying a little extra for my plane ticket. But when you are flying with a one-way ticket, countries want to make sure that if you are going to use that general visa from the U.S., that you for sure are traveling, that you're not going to actually just stay there. And so what ends up happening is that they need proof for you to leave the country. I've never had an issue with this at the Border Patrol. I haven't heard of anybody having issues with this at the Border Patrol, specifically on land when you're going through, country borders on a bus. But I have heard people having issues with this at the airports. So what a lot of governments do is that they put this requirement on the airports, and even though the government's not necessarily checking, they expect the airports to check. Because of this, airports will use this as a way to get you to buy a last-minute ticket at a super high cost and generate some money. So I had friends that got stopped and were told basically you can't enter, after they landed, like all this stuff, you can't enter into this country until you have proof that you're going to be exiting the country. And so they buy a flight. Well, there's actually a service for this. So some people recommended that you get a bus ticket. When you're in South America, you can't really buy bus tickets ahead of time. And they were pretty pricey for the ones that I did find. Specifically Colombia, I couldn't figure it out. Specifically Peru, I couldn't figure it out, which we'll talk about later. But you want to have proof that you're going to be exiting the country. And so what I ended up doing is I used this company at onwardticket.com. It was like $12. They buy you a flight, or it's like a legitimate flight. So for $12, they'll buy you this plane ticket. You get this plane ticket, and for whatever it is, if you're going to be staying at this country in 30 days, whatever date you put, they bought you a plane ticket leaving on that date. After about 2 weeks, they basically refund themselves that money for that plane ticket. And for $12, you get that service and you don't have to worry about it. It's a legit plane ticket. You can show this to the airport. You won't have any issues going through Border Patrol. You won't have any issues at the airport saying you need to show or have proof that you're going to be leaving this country. And so for $12, you can do that. I did that ahead of time. I ended up not doing it again. I only flew into Colombia for this trip, and then from Colombia took a bus to Ecuador, and then from Ecuador took a bus to Peru. So I didn't use this more than once, and probably what I would do now is if I get kind of push it and show up to the airport, and if they don't allow me in, then I would go on onwardticket.com and go ahead and buy the ticket. Maybe not the best idea to try and push it when you're arriving, especially if you have like connecting flights, but that's probably what I'm going to do next time around. But yeah, onwardticket.com is what I used. Legit service. You get a real ticket. There's other services out there that are pretty scammy looking. It doesn't look like a legit website, or they give you they kind of doctor up a document to make it look like you have like an official ticket when it's not an actual real ticket, and some people have had issues with those. So I like this company. It's what I use. It's what I'll use in the future, and it just gave me peace of mind that I wasn't going to get stopped. I didn't know about this in Asia, that this was an issue. I guess they cracked down on it a little harder in South America, and so you want to make sure that you know that going into it. And yeah, I did it. I think maybe about a week ahead, 5 days ahead of my trip, I ended up buying that ticket. $12. They take care of it all. I get a rent-a-ticket, a screenshot to show the airport company if they were to ask. They ended up not asking, but that way that you're not stuck anywhere. You can also look, I believe, the government websites, that travel.gov website, I believe they have that in their recommendations or in their needs, that you'll need to show proof that you're actually going to be leaving. So when you show up to a country, you need to have an address that you're going to be staying at, and you need to have proof that you're not going to be staying there for 30 days. Other countries might have a cheap bus ticket that you can buy and then potentially use or potentially not use in order to cross the border, but this wasn't an option for this time. When I was getting ready for my trip, I really don't, this is something I started maybe about a year ago, and I stopped Google imaging places that I wanted to go. Pretty much I just go off of reviews. I use TripAdvisor a lot for things, and then TripAdvisor is really nice because they have a bunch of comments, and so if you're trying to find something, usually you can find out more details in the comments, but I try not to look at the photos. And it has worked out so well because you end up going on these hikes and you come across this gorgeous view that you really weren't expecting because you had saw the photos. And so due to this, I really don't Google a lot of places to go. I do definitely get a list. Typically what I do is I just ask friends that have been on the trip. And a lot of persons were there to help me out for Thailand, Indonesia. Not a lot of persons have been to South America. And so I might have had like one or two friends that had some tips for me, but other than that, I was pretty much going in blind. And once I got to that area, that's when I started talking with other travelers. That's when I started getting ideas of like places to go. That's why I don't like a schedule, because sometimes like you read about all this stuff. Specifically for the Asia trip, I did look up a little bit. You read about something and then you show up and it's either closed or it's not like what it's meant, or it's not as good as you thought it was going to be. Or specifically for like Peru, if you're going to go on a hike, they have a lot of landslides. And so most of these hikes that we had heard about were like closed. But because we didn't have a plan going in, we weren't like super devastated that we couldn't go on this one hike. And so I like to travel that way versus having a plan going throughout, because it's, you know, if you're having this plan and you have this idea of what the travel adventure is going to be, and then it doesn't happen that day, or you only gave yourself one day for this like really, you know, big thing that you wanted to do, and it's raining all day and it's just quote unquote ruined. When you're traveling without a schedule, you can, oh, it's raining today, okay, I'll just do something else. I won't go on this hike. Maybe I'll go to this museum, or whatever you're going to do, just hang out at the hostel or hang out with your travel buddies that day, whatever it might be. And you can kind of just make your schedule as you go along. Especially if you're doing a lot of hiking, it's really, really beneficial to have extra days in order to do that, depending on the weather. And so I asked a lot of friends, kind of got my general plans together. So what my general plans looked like was, okay, I'm going to be spending 30 days here in Colombia, about a month. And then after that, I'm going to go to Ecuador, and I have 30 days to either spend all in Ecuador or 30 days to kind of split up between Ecuador and Peru. And then after that, I'm going to spend 30 days in Argentina. And so those are my plans. It ended up working out that once Jess joined, we learned about Bolivia's salt flats. We learned that we could actually get into the country. So we were going to split those 30 days between Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And that was just nice. That's the flexibility schedule, so you get to just decide you're going to go to another country when you want to, rather than being kind of pinned down to a certain schedule and a certain location. This one, when preparing for this trip, it was really tough because with Thailand and Indonesia, you really only have to worry about one climate. I was there kind of during like the rainy season, so I needed to be prepared for rain and hot weather, and that was pretty much it. For this one, I was going from the equator all the way to potentially, well, it didn't end up happening. Argentina closed their borders before we could cross. But I was going to go from equator weather to the closest landmass that you could go to before hitting Antarctica. And so you had to pack for these like massive difference in climates. And so I had my really warm weather, I had all, you know, I ended up forgetting my flip-flops. I had to buy some sandals when I was in Colombia. But I had my swim trunks, I had my swim towel, and then on the other side of things I had my hoodies and I had my coats, which I don't think would have been enough for Argentina. But you can always buy more on the road if you need it. And so when packing that made it more difficult. I had a 46-liter bag I ended up buying that I'll talk about specifically for this trip. Before, when I did Asia and Indonesia, I found out that 60 liters was just too much. 46 liters was just enough to fit all that in. So maybe, you know, a little extra liter, a little extra room would have been nice. I typically don't buy a lot of stuff to bring back with me. But if I needed extra room, I don't think 46 liters would have been enough in order to kind of make those purchases. And so when I was preparing for this trip, something I realized when I was on the trip for Asia was that I used like a legit backpacker's backpack. There's like two different types of backpacking. You got the hostel backpackers, which just kind of like go from hostel to hostel in international countries. And then you have the real backpackers that are camping out and doing 7-day treks in the wilderness and just have what's on their back. So when I originally went to Asia, I borrowed a 60-liter real backpack that was meant for like camping. Most of these are like vertical loads, and so you have like you can enter the bag up through the top, you can enter the bag through the bottom, but it's like a big tube. And it ended up being pretty hard, one, to secure the bag to make sure that nobody was going to get into it when I wasn't there. So I ended up buying it was like a TSA lock and this stainless steel cable. It was pretty cheap. It would have been like $15. And I would loop it through everything and lock it down. So I really just kind of like locked up the bottom and then made it a top-only access bag. That way I could just keep it secured, and then when I left my backpack in the room, went on hiking or whatever it might be, I would have another set of that TSA lock and the cable. I would loop it through the top and then connect it to the bed. And so the only way people will be able to get into it is if they brought a knife and like cut it open. So I never had any issues with any of my stuff stolen. Really, like when people get their stuff stolen, it's opportunistic type stuff. In Colombia, there was a couple of friends that were living in a room on like the second floor. I always try not to get comfortable, always connect and like hook my bag with, I ended up getting a bike lock this time around. So that if somebody's coming in, they're cleaning, they can't just like run off with my bag. But these friends didn't lock their stuff down, they left it on the second floor. Apparently, some persons came by with a ladder, put it up, climbed up the ladder, stole their stuff, and then left. And so they lost everything. So that's kind of what I do for security, but it was tough with a real backpack when I did Asia. So for this time around, I went and looked at several different bags at REI, ended up finding this co-op one that they had with Osprey, 46 liters. It was a smaller bag, and it was basically, it was more like, it wouldn't be something you'd want to throw over your shoulders and hike with for miles. The max I did was like 3 miles, and my hips started getting kind of sore because it doesn't hold the weight as well. But it's a horizontal loader, so it's more like a bag that you would just have like going into a hotel for a weekend or so. If you're going to TravCon, I would definitely use this bag. And it was water resistant. It was a horizontal load, so when you're hopping between hostels, it's so easy to just unzip, open it up. There's only one point of access. You have all your stuff there, so you don't have to like dig down to the bottom of the bag or unload everything just to get that one item that you need. And so this was so much nicer traveling around with because of those two things. So it had one point of access. I only needed that one TSA lock and cable in order to put it onto my, attach it to my bed or attach it to the locker or whatever it might be. And also the ability to easily access and zip it back up, because if you're like me and you're spending max like 3 days at a hostel, you're moving an awful lot. And so repacking all of your bag, unpacking all of your bag gets really, really old. And so if you can just have like this bag ready to go, unzip, zip, and you're off. Oh, it was so nice. So nice. I'm definitely going to be doing a podcast on kind of the top purchases that I made in the past year, and this is definitely one of them. I'll also be talking about another one. Getting ready for this trip, what I did for Asia was the TSA lock. What is a TSA lock? This is a lock that specifically you can take through the airport, that if you have like a normal locker room lock, one of those big silver master locks with like the dial on it, if you go that route and they need to get in your bag, they will cut it and you'll be out of the lock. So these TSA locks, they can get into and relock it for you. And so I ended up getting 2 of them, and I got these cables. I really like these nice thin cables. They pretty much weave in and out of the tiniest cages that you might have or on the bed, and they're pretty long, so it was really nice to have those. I ended up losing one along the way, and then ended up having to buy this like big bulky bike lock chain. It wasn't a chain, it was like coated in plastic, and it was big thick like stainless steel cable. And that one wasn't as nice. Couldn't always fit it through like those tight corners. And it was just kind of like hard to manage. It was kind of coiled up, and it was if you had it like your bag on and you had it wrapped around the bed and you click it and lock it, once you unlock it, it had a tendency of like springing at you. So I definitely like those smaller, skinnier stainless steel ones. And you're never going to be 100% secure, but you don't want to create opportunities. And so if I want somebody, like if somebody's going to steal my stuff, I want them to have to work for it. It's kind of my view on it. And so I'll put a link down. REI has those. I'm pretty sure you can get them cheaper at Amazon or online, eBay, whatever it might be. But yeah, it was super nice to have that cable to secure it. And then I always get 2 locks because you can always lock your bag up, put it into a locker, and then lock the locker as well. I always tell myself, don't get comfortable. It is so easy to start, like, once you're there, you're starting to feel really comfortable because you realize, all these things that you had heard, maybe it wasn't true, or you were so nervous for this trip, and now, you're seeing all these people, and it's easy to get comfortable, but I urge you to not get comfortable and then lock your stuff up every single time after you're done using it. Even in Airbnbs where I was staying solo, where I was staying by myself, I was curious if somebody like coming into the room, cleaning later, whatever it might be, if they just see my bag sitting there unlocked or not attached to the bed, cleaning guy might just take it along with them. So I definitely do that for those trips. The other second thing that I was really excited to buy was a microfiber towel. These guys dry so fast, and so when I traveled to Asia, I just had a normal towel with me, like an old towel that I wasn't scared of losing, and it was a cotton towel, and there were times where I had to throw it in my bag because it wasn't dry from the night before me showering. I had to go. Now my bag's smelling damp. I was worried about mold because it was wet. These microfiber towels, I've taken showers 2 hours before, hung it up. It was already dry, ready to go. Really nice. I ended up buying a really large one, expecting to use it on the beach. Definitely could have used it on the beach. However, I realized I didn't want to get my towel sandy from the beach and then go home and try to use it for, post shower. So I would say just get it like your normal towel size. It does have like a little zip on it. The one I bought at least has a little zip on it that you can put like a phone, wallet, or something. It's meant to take on the beach. But I would probably I'm going to travel with 2 sizes this next time, or the one I bought was pretty, like even rolled up. It does take, it's not large by any means. It's definitely not the size of like a normal towel, like way smaller, but I'm definitely more aware of how much space things take up now. So what I'll probably do is go buy a different size just for showering, and then buy either like something just thin material that I don't have to worry about sand sticking on, and pretty much just like the thinnest like layer of cloth between me and the beach when I'm having those beach days. I've seen some advertised like things that like sand doesn't stick. When I was in Indonesia, they had these like the men wear. I don't know the term, but they kind of look like long skirts that the men would wear for like religious services and cultural celebrations. I ended up buying one so I could go into this religious area, into this temple, and I ended up using it for a beach towel after that, and it was like perfect. I don't know where it's went since then, but like the sand didn't stick to it. It was like perfect material. It's super thin, so it doesn't take up any room in your bag. So that's probably what I'm going to do. But yeah, the microfiber towel was definitely one of my favorite purchases in the past year. Highly recommend that. I've had some friends, specifically ladies with longer hair, say that it's not great for drying the hair. I never had an issue with it. Again, like my hair's longer, but not that long, and I just go to bed with a damp head. That doesn't bother me. And so, might not be the best for that, but quick drying, you can just grab and go. So nice. The other thing that I bought was a filtering water bottle. And this was a purchase that I was incredibly excited for, and it ended up not working out as well as I thought it was going to. So I was a little bit bummed. I recommended it to my friend Jess before she came on, before I realized kind of an issue with it, but it's still a decent purchase. I'm just wondering if there's a better one out there. But LifeStraw, really mission-driven company, really liked their message on when I was looking up these like different water bottles. I wanted a water bottle that could filter itself because I was going to South America, and that is like the one thing you hear about is don't drink the water. And so I wanted something that would be able to filter, because when I went to Asia, you feel so guilty because you're using all these like plastic water bottles, and then it's more expensive, and just like all around a better idea to have your own water bottle and to have one that's going to filter. So you don't have to worry about getting sick, and you're not spending all this money on water bottles, and you're being eco-friendly. And so they used to be like specific plastics. Their filter will like last forever in this LifeStraw. But the one downside is that their bottle totally leaked. When you were going hiking, if you put your water bottle and it wasn't standing up vertical in your bag, say like tipped over at a 45-degree angle, or say tipped over horizontally, now all your stuff's wet. And so Jess and I started hiking with it on our bags, and like clipped to the bags like outside, and it just like, it would be swinging around, and it's not the best thing to hike with. And even then, like, you'd sit down and like take a rest, and all of a sudden you feel a wet spot, and you know, now you're cold in that spot. Or you know, you're going on a hike, you want your water, you get somewhere and you're gonna go, oh, I'm gonna drink some water, and like half your bottle's empty because it's leaked out. And so it only specifically leaked from the top, like through the filter process of it. I'm surprised they haven't fixed this issue yet, but it was kind of a bummer to where I'm looking into other companies in order for the next LifeStraw. Two positives that came out of it. One positive that came out of it, when you're kind of hiking with it and it's swinging along, I tore that water bottle up, like through when we were doing rock hikes and like climbing, and it got all these scratches on it and looked like rugged and had some character. And then I totally left it behind, right in the middle of when Jess and I were trying to get back to Cusco after the lockdown happened. So kind of a bummer. I do miss that water bottle. Oh, it was nice. I don't know, I like stuff that has like character to it. Like if a jacket comes on with like, I don't know, it's got a little bit of an imperfection with it, or I wear it and now like the elbows are starting to get kind of like tore up and stuff. I like that a lot better than just like, you know, pristine piece of clothing or pristine water bottle I'm carrying around. So I was super excited for LifeStraw. Ended up not being the best, but you definitely want something to filter the water when you go on these trips. This goes for Asia, this goes for South America. I'm always going to have one for future trips. Something that I did differently this time around versus Asia is that I didn't go with my cell company here in the US, AT&T. I didn't go with their travel plan when I went to a different country. So what I needed to do was, I was already in the market for a phone. I made sure that I bought an unlocked phone. If you have a phone and you're getting ready to go across seas, you can call the company. They have like their own steps, you know, whether it's Apple or Android. You can figure this out, and like basically they give you a number and you call them and they will unlock it for you. An unlocked phone means that it's not specific to like an AT&T bandwidth or Verizon bandwidth. You can now use it on any cell tower, which is what you want if you're going to another country, because whatever, you know, if Verizon was, for example, they have different companies down there, but say Verizon only operates in Colombia and then AT&T only operates in Argentina, you're going to want a phone that can work on both, because you're going to be swapping out the SIM card for each. So the reason I did this is because the price of having like the AT&T travel plan, like the emergency if I needed to like get a hold of anybody, was like really expensive. And I wanted a phone that I could use on buses, whether I'm looking up like the next place to stay, or just kind of a safety issue of being able to communicate online. I wanted a phone that would have internet. And so you have two options. I'll give the first option, and then later on I'm going to talk about one of the things I wish I would have done. Your first option is to go ahead and buy a SIM card whenever you reach your destination. This is a little tricky. I had my SIM card. First, you need to make sure that you're going to take your SIM card out of the phone. You have to know how to do that. And then store it in a dry, safe place to carry with you the remainder of your trip so that it doesn't get ruined. So that when you land back in the US, you're ready to go and use your cell phone. Second thing you have to do is find the SIM card that's going to work for you in that country. When I landed in Colombia, my plan was to go around the airport and find a SIM card that I could just put in my phone. It ended up not being that easy. They didn't have it at the airport, and so I ended up having my own little journey of getting to I had to hail a taxi. I had to no cell service, so I don't know exactly where I'm going. You just don't have, you can't communicate, especially with the language barrier. There's several things kind of going on, and you're a little bit more vulnerable when you don't have it. And so I got into a taxi, went from the taxi into the hostel that I was going to stay at. Once I got to the hostel, I could use their Wi-Fi, looked up the closest place to get a SIM card, ended up walking to that address that was listed on the site. Unfortunately, the address listed on the site didn't work, so I ended up getting to this building that was a hotel, and it wasn't even it wasn't a cell phone store place. And so I'd walked so far, and then now because I'm there, I don't have access to Wi-Fi, and so I don't have any internet. So I'm just kind of walking around the city looking for places. I ended up coming across this one place that kind of looked like a Spanish Best Buy, and went in and they helped me out. But you will need your passport. In most places, they take a picture, and then they have to activate the card for you. So it's not just enough to buy it and plug it in your phone. If they're not messing around with it on the computer, they're not activating it. And there's things you need to know, because you will definitely run into some scams later on if you don't. And so going through all their plans, this poor girl's talking to me in Spanish. I don't know Spanish at this point at all, and she's using this translator, and it was just, I felt so bad for her. I was like, I don't know. And so that was its whole adventure on its own. I think it took me 3 hours to get a SIM card into my phone. And then once I had the SIM card, bought a really cheap option, it was so cheap. Had to get those, Colombian pesos before to make that transaction. But once it was in my phone, I was good to go. And now I could communicate. Now I could, get an Uber, get a Lyft, which was frowned upon in the country, but it was still legal. It eventually became illegal, but then you could always use a different app, one of the Colombian apps. And so after that point was a lot better. So you do have that adventure to it, and then I suggest going to a store rather than trying to pick it up at a kiosk, because what I didn't realize is that every time you cross a country border, this is what I tried to do, because I think I got a 30-day plan. I went back to that same store and told them I was getting ready to go to Ecuador, and I wanted to know if it was going to work there. And they said, no, once you cross the border, you have to get another SIM card. So even though I was going to use the same cell service, even though I was going to use the same AT&T company, whatever it might be, I had to get another SIM card because Colombian SIM cards don't work in Ecuador. Ecuadorian SIM cards don't work in Peru. Peruvian SIM cards don't work in Argentina. So every time you cross the border, you're going to have to get a new SIM card. So it got pretty redundant. Some places you just get there, when I crossed the border from Colombia to Ecuador, they didn't really have anything at the border. So I again, without Wi-Fi, without internet, couldn't communicate. Didn't really know where I was going. A lot of these bus stops don't have signs. So you're I don't know if I'm supposed to be getting off here or not. And then you have to wait until you get to either a store, or you take a chance with a kiosk, where at bus stations, a random, usually a guy is trying to sell just sodas and snacks, and he just so happens to have SIM cards as well. And so you buy this SIM card. And you're taking a big risk, because one, you need to make sure that he's actually activating it. A lot of them will just sell you the card and that's it. So you have to know that they need to activate it. If they're not activating it, something's fishy. I got talked out of it once. I was no, I'm pretty sure activation. He's oh, it's already activated. And then later on, it only lasted maybe a week, maybe 5 days before it kicked off. So it definitely wasn't activated. they'll sell you plans that, maybe you're trying to get a 3-month plan, and you buy a 3-month plan or a 30-day plan, and then the plan they actually bought was only 2 weeks and they kept the remainder. So there's just a lot more risks when you're using those persons at the kiosks versus going to an actual store. Typically, if they're not like pulling out your passport and they're not like messing around with it trying to activate it, that's going to be like your big red flags that maybe I should go somewhere else. I'll talk about the second option because I ended up, I knew about this option before going in, but I didn't realize that every time I go to a new country, I need a new SIM card. So there is an option in order to make this whole process a lot easier. It's a little more pricey. I wouldn't even call it pricey. It's more money, but for like avoiding that entire hassle and avoiding a day or two when you're in a new country of not being able to communicate, not being able to like see where you're going on maps, I'm a lot more comfortable with the second option. I will be using this option moving forward. And so we'll talk more about that on the end of this episode, talking about like what I wish I would have done. Something I did for Asia, emergency cash. Keep US currency on you. I usually keep about $60 on me when I'm traveling around. I wish I would have known about the Ecuadorian currency being US money, because I would have just brought more US cash with me, and that way I wouldn't have been charged any like ATM withdrawal fees from these Ecuadorian banks. But this really helped me when I was in Asia. I ended up getting stuck on an island called Nusa Penida. I didn't go to an ATM before I like made the ferry cross over. My plan was just to land and then use the ATM there. All their ATMs were down, so now I'm stuck. Was supposed to pay cash when I showed up to this hostel. I don't have any cash. Luckily, they were super nice, let me use their moped in order to ride around, and like all their ATMs on this island did not work. So what ended up saving me was that like 3 days later, I ended up finding, because I was only going to stay there like 2 days. I had to stay an extra day because I couldn't figure out. I had to pay a ferry to go back. I had to pay this hostel, and I didn't know how I was going to pay them. I was riding around and eventually found this like cash currency exchange place. And so luckily I had the US cash on me, just walked in, got the currency exchange, and was able to pay the hostel, was able to pay them for the moped, the 3-night stay, was able to pay the ferry to get back. And so that came in handy for that trip. Ended up not using the US emergency cash for me on the South America trip. But again, you want to kind of cover your assets and have that cash on you, because cash is going to save you in certain situations if you can't find, if ATMs aren't working, or you're in a place that the credit cards don't work. I remember having a layover in the Philippines and showed up and they didn't have a currency exchange. They didn't have, like, their credit cards weren't accepting any weren't working. And so I had a 7-hour layover there, super hungry, was like super thirsty, couldn't buy anything, so I just like sat there hangry until the next flight. So sometimes, you're in an area that doesn't really work out either way, but always keep that cash on you. I recommend keeping it in 2 separate spots. One of the spots I really like to use is I will take like a deodorant stick, one that's pretty much like used up, still has like maybe half inch still in it. I'll unscrew it and then I'll pop the top off. I'll put my cash on the inside. Any extra, I always keep an extra debit card with me as well, just in case. Maybe an extra credit card. Anything important. You can't really fit like a copy of your documentation in there, but like those are like small thing cash cards. Like I keep in there. I pop the top back on, screw it down, and then I think it's a really sneaky place to like keep your valuables. So I do that for emergency cash, and then with documents, I always keep a paper copy and I always keep a digital copy. So this is the passport. This is your yellow booklet of all your vaccinations. If you have an international driver's license, which we'll talk about, you can keep that on your phone as well. just like anything, driver's license, passport, like anything that you might need, keep on your phone, and then also keep a paper document. I don't like to travel around with my passport. I realized this trip that some places only accept your actual passport. They won't accept paper like copies, like photocopies. But when I was in Asia, photocopies were fine. South America, they wanted like the actual passport. But I always just kind of used both. And those were specifically for like hostels, or if you were going to rent, say, a moped, which I actually didn't do in South America, which was a big difference between like Asia and South America. Asia, you rent a moped, you like to drive yourself. South America, there's no place to rent mopeds, and you just end up using Ubers or the local tuk-tuks, which they also call them tuk-tuks in South America. I thought they would call them something different. They also have colectivos, which are like big vans that you just hop on with a bunch of people. Yeah, that was like the transportation difference, which is also why we'll be talking about international driver's licenses later on. And so that's pretty much it for like documentation and emergency cash. Two other really, really important things that I ended up doing on this trip that I hadn't done on any of my other trips. The first thing was that I ended up creating and opened a Charles Schwab account. Charles Schwab is really well known for not having fees for international ATM withdrawals. And so when you're taking money out of an ATM, usually banks will charge you an international fee. So there's kind of two different fees that can occur with an ATM when you're in another country. One, you can get charged by the bank that you're using. So if you're using, say, like US Bank, like I do back home, if you use US Bank, they will charge you an international withdrawal fee if you're withdrawing money in a different country. Or if you're not using an ATM that's, a US Bank ATM, they'll charge you a fee. So there's that part of the fee. The second part of the fee is the actual ATM itself may or may not charge you a fee for making that withdrawal. So you have two things to look at. With Charles Schwab, you automatically take care of that international ATM fee. You can withdraw from any ATMs. They're not going to charge you a 1% fee, 2% fee, which sounds small. But if you are withdrawing, like I don't like to draw big chunk of cash out if I don't have to. I would much rather travel with like as little cash on me as possible. So if you're making a lot of tiny transactions, that like 1% to 2%, like it eventually adds up. Sometimes they have a cap, sometimes there's like a flat fee. I'll talk more about that. But I got Charles Schwab. Setting it up was super fast. I had to do it in person. Did I have to do it in person? I did it in person, but you might be able to do it online. And I got set up. You had to get both an investment stock type of account with them, as well as a checking account. You couldn't just open a checking account. So we got both of those. You put your money into the investment stock one, and then you just roll it over into your checking account. And then that's how I knew what I'd saved up, like maybe $6,000 for this trip. Had the $6,000 in there. Knew if I made purchases on my credit card, I could just take that money and pay it from that account specifically. And it was easier for me to realize how much I was spending or not spending on this trip, was because I had it separated out from my typical US bank checking account. I think if there was a Charles Schwab bank, really, I'm not a big fan of US Bank, but it's one of the very few that are in my hometown, my small hometown. And so I want my family, if anything were to happen, I have them on the account. They can just walk in and take care of it. And that's the reason I use them. But if I had the option, I might just automatically switch everything to Charles Schwab or go to a different bank. But that's kind of the reason. So I keep those two separate. I specifically am only using Charles Schwab for travel because of that free ATM withdrawal. Then once you go to, say, Colombia or you go to Ecuador, you're going to look up ATMs that don't have fees. This is wildly, it might be better to search it in Spanish. Either way, it was hard for me to find ones that were accurate. And so I would just ask the locals or ask travelers. Sometimes there's not any banks that will, not charge you for money, but at least they know which ones are not going to charge you like a massive amount for percentages, because some of these percentages can get pretty high for the ATM, or sometimes the ATMs will charge you like a flat rate, which if that's the case, you can't avoid it. There's no other options. You might as well just, pay the $2 for a massive withdrawal of money or a bigger withdrawal of money rather than just like, 3 tiny ones. So now you're paying, only $2 versus $6. You can keep your travels going a little bit longer doing it that way. So yeah, my recommendation would be to ask locals what ATMs they use, specifically like persons in the hostels or places that you are staying. Like ask them which ATMs to use for the cheaper withdrawals. And then if you don't know anybody, or you're kind of like new to the area and needing cash now, you can Google it, but just know like it might be wrong. One of the ones that I was told for sure would have like 0 fees ended up being like one of the most expensive ones that I found along the way. So those are like the 2 things to look at when you're withdrawing cash on ATM. When I did my first trip, ever back going to England, I withdrawed so many so many international withdrawals and got like charged so much money over the course of me spending a pretty short amount of time there, just the summer. And I wish I would have known this for that first trip back when I was 23 versus figuring this out now. So if you're about to jump on the trip, that's a huge part for something that you'll want to know to make this a little bit more affordable. When you have kind of a set budget, I had that $6K, and then I was kind of just I have the option. I only have one way ticket, so I can either go until like my timeline runs out, or I can go until my money runs out. And so if you can extend that money a little bit further, if you're saving, that $4, like if you're staying in a cheap hostel, that's a night's worth of like accommodation. That's a whole extra night that's not going towards, an ATM fee. And then the last thing that I did was get an international credit card. This is one that I had during Asia. I specifically got it for Asia. Also, the travel points are super nice. I've pretty much done Chase so far. Chase does have a rule if you're really looking into get into like credit card hacking. I have an episode on that with Alex Angar. You can look that up. But Chase specifically has like a rule that you can't do more than like 4 signups in 24 months or whatever it might be. They call it like the 424 rule. That's definitely not the correct numbers, so for sure look that up. But they have their own specific rules. So Chase tends to, over time, kind of like look like the better option, but there are caps with it, so don't just automatically like jump into it without really knowing what you're doing. And so I ended up getting this Chase credit card, and this specific one, the Sapphire card, was nice because there's no international fees with it. So if I swipe the credit card, I'm not getting an additional fee on the credit card side of it for that international use. I am still getting that credit card charge from most of the companies. I don't remember this happening in Asia, but South America, they definitely have like the 3%, 4%, whatever it might be. The largest I saw was like 7%. It's like huge amount for whatever you're spending. It was specifically a party hostel. I wasn't staying at it. I usually stay at quiet hostels next door, so you're gonna have a little getaway. And then when I'm feeling like I want to start meeting some people, go out for a drink, I go to the party hostels. And I remember ordering like, I think a burger, and I was like, what, 7%? Like, no. I'll just go out to the burrito truck outside. There's a guy called the burrito, or I called him Burrito Vampire. Nobody else called him that. But it was a guy that only came out at night and like sold burritos, and oftentimes I would just skip dinner, wait for him to come out because they were so cheap and they were so good. But I wasn't about to pay 7% in fees for something that I just swiped my card. So that is what I did preparing for South America. We're gonna wrap the episode up here. Turn this into 2 parts because I realize I'm already about over an hour of raw recording. And then this next episode is definitely going to be a much smaller episode of what I wish I would have done. So the goal of mine to just start start increasing the list of what I did correctly, and then start decreasing the list of what I wish I would have done differently as I do these big trips. But if you guys are looking for the next episodes of the New Medical Nomads podcast, we officially launched them on Facebook. Just look up New Medical Nomads podcast. You'll find them there for the official launches. If you want early access to these episodes, like when I do a 2-part series, I'll often just upload these at the same time. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, whatever you use to kind of listen to these. For those that are on YouTube, being able to watch all my hand gestures when I'm talking about zipping up the bag and tying up the bag, it's a little more comical. But yeah, and then any of the shares, the hearts, the likes, the comments, any of that engagement is much appreciated. Allows more people to see it so we can help more people when they're getting ready for these international travels, which is the whole goal of this show. So thank you guys. I hope you all are doing well, and everybody have safe adventures. Everybody have safe travels.